Hi, Burak. How are you?
Hi, Lewis. How are you? It's great to see you.
Great to see you. You're looking good, my friend. Where are you today?
I'm actually in Greece.
Excellent, excellent. And that's where you've sort of been hunkered down during this last year with the pandemic, I think, right?
I think it was a surprise to everybody where they're going to end up. And I spent the past 5 years in New York City. And with the lockdown, I decided to head back to London, where I was living before moving to New York. And London shutting down, I felt like, you know what? It might be better to just go to Greece as a nice place to just hunker down, indeed. And I have been doing that until a couple months ago.
That's excellent. I hope you're in a place where you're looking at the water every day.
Yes, I'm actually looking at it right now.
That's beautiful. Great. I won't ask you to turn your camera around, but I've got some water right here too in the lake in Oakland. So, well, it's good to see you, and thanks for joining this conversation. And as you and I've talked recently, you're someone that I have gotten to know over the last 8+ years. Since I've been working in the sustainable fashion space and came and met with you at Parsons, but your background in fashion began before Parsons. Tell us a little bit about sort of where you got started and how you got into the fashion industry.
Yes, I mean, a life journey, you never know how it's going to take you, but ultimately you need to be open-minded around letting it lead as well. My undergrad was in international relations. I intended to go into foreign service, but quickly realized that I have an interest in also having a connection back into the business side. Did an MBA in California, and then was looking for opportunities. Interestingly enough, I saw some unique role at that time, which was very rare, dealing with supply chain issues for a very large group at that time, at the largest specialty retailer, Gap Inc, who was looking for people to come on board to help them address their supply chain challenges. It was a perfect place for me to jump in, where I can tap into my interest and experience in dealing with international institutions, issues related to international relations itself, but also being able to contribute in some ways to business. So as part of the Gap Inc.'s global compliance team at the moment when I joined them, we were looking at all the challenges they faced in the industry, especially based on labor standards issues they were facing in the early to late 90s, and help them build the strategy around how to tackle those challenges in the factories, creating systems to be able to handle issues in, I think it was around 50 countries, over 4,000 suppliers, which was quite a grand scale. So it was a quick learning for me to be able to just go from factory to factory, understand what it means to subcontract and how many layers does it go deep within that system, and then understand the complexity of this global supply chain structure for large fashion brands like Gap.
Amazing.
That allowed me to, and then that obviously took me to many other brands afterwards. I can quickly list them. So from Gap, I ended up going into, at that time, it was called Gucci Group, which became then PPR, then Kering, really leading the luxury space around sustainability issues. And last days of my time at Gap, as well as my whole journey at Kering, we actually focused on the overall strategy of sustainability across all brands, evolving from labor standards to environmental standards to making sure the business strategy embeds all of these issues into its core. And from there, I ended up going into a small nonprofit called Made By, and was the general manager for a period of time, working across many different brands and retailers in Europe. And then took a role with as the first sustainability director at Swarovski Group, working with the Swarovski family, the world famous crystal brand, and really helping them establish a sustainability strategy across the world for their operations, for operations that are B2B, B2C, everything from crystal to natural gems as well as synthetic gems. So that led me in an unusual way to Parsons. So I spent 5 years as the Dean of Fashion there. And now I have taken a new challenge, and I'm now the CEO of the Fashion Commission in Saudi Arabia. It's a country where fashion industry is now a key priority, and we are working on building the industry from scratch. So as you can see, you never know where you're going to end up.
You never know. Well, I love that, because as I'm listening to you describe your journey, I'm thinking about my own, and only at this point can I look back and see how everything fit in almost a strategic way. But at the time, I never felt like I was especially in my 20s and 30s, it was moving around to different things to find my passion. And then one day it all started to click. Do you feel the same way, that you sort of now can look back and see the story of how the strategic career was built, or did you know all along that you were heading in this direction?
I think it's impossible to know when it's such a varied experience like yourself and like mine. And I think being in the Dean of Fashion role, where I was actually overseeing about 2,000 students. So suddenly you become a mentor to so many people, and constantly you're thinking about what's their future, because everybody's worrying about I graduate and what happens next. And so that always makes me reflect back to what I'm doing as well. And it was clear that ultimately it's you follow your gut, and you have to go in a direction that makes sense, but also never dismiss your skills and your knowledge and experience you're bringing, and never dismiss your past as well, because you're always building onto what you've achieved in the past. And what we are doing today, any one of us in the world, is thanks to everything we've done in the past. So if you are not moving, then it's not going to also make you move further. So it's best to be always on the move, but also having a high level idea about things you care and what are the things you enjoy. Because ultimately, when you enjoy, you don't even realize that you're working.
I love that. And you're reminding me of this sort of analogy, and I'm paraphrasing it, of how you can't kick the rungs beneath you out, or you can't kick the box as you're stacking the boxes to climb. You can't kick the box beneath you out.
Don't.
But you're you're built on the foundation of what you've done and where you came. You can't ever look at any piece of it as not part of the total build.
But having said that, I must also mention, clearly not everything is linear. So if you technically look at it on paper, they sound very different journeys, very different places in the world, very different type of jobs. There is a synergy. I can already see how I connected one to the other. It's being able to be creative also, to see what are the applicable skills from your past. You can absolutely go into a new direction, but that new direction, you need to have in your mind, how are you getting there with everything that you've done in your past? You have to have some groundwork.
Yeah, I'd be interested for you to whiteboard how your mind and brain sees things, because you probably see them in a circle more than in a line as well.
That's it. There are so many circles. We learned to talk about ecosystems for years in our field. So it's all about being part of the ecosystem and finding those connecting dots, and making sure that you can move around different parts of that system. And it's good to have analogy to also biology and ecosystem concept with how the world works and how nature works, because in some ways you understand what enables you to survive and prosper, and not everything goes in that direction. And it's never constant, it's always evolving.
Yeah, that's so true. So with sustainability, I've noticed a trend with a lot of people that our passion for sustainability is born out of the ethics space. We come out of it from the social labor or human approach, and then because we're looking at the holistic approach to how a product's made or how something is designed, and we start to look at efficiencies around, or limitations related to the environment. How, for you, was that how it happened, or how did you get sparked and kind of pull sustainability into the work? Or have you always just loved the planet and nature and seen this?
I mean, the reality is I was very much interested in tackling challenging issues in the world, and I wanted to make sure that it's done beyond just one company's focus, but that's addressing something that's much more regional, if not global. And the opportunity at Gap was that it allowed me to work across a whole system and be able to see the complex large picture. The more complex it is, the more excited I get. Not everybody has that personality. I fully understand it. But in my case, I want the most challenging things to be presented in front of me for me to really force myself to figure out how to address that challenge. So ethics was the issue of the time when we were really starting in the 90s. As it evolved into environment and as we increased our knowledge around the impact of the industry, clearly that became the next big challenge to tackle. That didn't mean that labor issues disappeared. It was just another added layer of complexity that we had to tackle and look at the synergy between labor and environmental conditions and making sure that we are also balancing that right as companies, as industry, as well as governments and all the nonprofits working in the space. So I build on that passion of following where there's a need to really find new solutions. And I feel in the power of industry to be able to bring change. Ultimately, humanity progressed because of also the way all of these companies evolved and how businesses have nurtured the new opportunities for everybody. So we cannot ignore that fact. And how do we build on this opportunity to find that right balance between being able to make a profit, but also being able to find the balance between the needs of society as well as the immediate needs of a company itself. And never forget that every organization, institution, from government to nonprofits to companies, are made of people. And that was my number one message to everybody I engage with, is that it's not about one giant company or one government. Ultimately, it's the voice of many people that are representing that, and those people's opinion can bring change. So if we can connect at a human level, regardless of the roles we play, and no matter what, we play many roles. You may be a government official, you may be somebody working in the company, but at the end of the day, you may be a father, a dad, a brother, and also you're a human that's a part of the overall society. So reminding that we need to recognize all those hats in whatever role we are in making decisions.
Yeah, I love that because, one of the things, and this about the work we're doing with Apparel Tech Institute, is there's a lot of solutions that are actually ready and they're ready to scale, or there's tech or innovation, but it's uncovering that and then really bringing it into operationalizing it, which means humans or some form of, some form of the collective has to agree upon taking these things on, right? And so I like what you said about, at the end of the day, we're all individuals and humans, and this is only going to happen because we all make the decision to actually transition the way we live and work and produce on this planet.
Yeah, and no matter what, it's a long-term journey. But I remember looking back, we were always so anxious to get things done quickly, thinking that everything will change overnight. Yeah. After a decade, in larger context, you feel like 10 years is still a good time to make this much progress. And I know there's urgency in many issues, but there's also a lot of solutions that are being implemented, and it is speeding up. And it's kind of like Moore's law. You're looking at the progressively increased amount of engagement. One, because there are new business opportunities, which is driving people to push for innovation, but also other parts of the world are really engaging in the system because it's a way to differentiate. I think now globally we are at a place where there's recognition that having an unsustainable solution is not acceptable. I think everybody would understand that you don't build a new business that's intentionally having a negative impact, because we know how to measure the impact. So when you're able to do it, it would be crazy to go in that direction with all of the requirements and measurements around the world at the government level, with a lot of quotas being put in, tariffs being put in. There are a lot of initiatives that are happening. And also everybody is now focused on innovative, sustainable solutions to be able to change the world. I mean, electric cars is a good example of how it's changing the trend. And now there are very interesting projections around what we're going to see by 2030, 2050.
Yeah. No, it feels like there's a tailwind, and you hinted at this or mentioned it, but I think the finance community getting in this and ESG reporting, really looking at the valuation of businesses and companies, the ability to lend money at a lower interest rate or have them be de-risked through this work. Just that entry into this work is changing things, I think, more rapidly than the first, like the last 10 or 15 years where things were moving a little bit more slowly. Do you see the same thing in terms of this momentum?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, the reality is I've never seen as many incubators and startups focused on sustainable innovation, right? So obviously there's a curve to that. And the more there is, the higher chance some of them will succeed. It's great to see some of these ideas even being replicated around the world. And several people are trying to go after the same solution. Which means that, under the radar for general consumer may not see it, but if you're in the industry, you're seeing beyond the mass scale manufacturing and industrial solutions. There's a lot happening. So suddenly we will see a big disruption because there are people coming outside of the system, some of them from VCs and finance community, looking at investing in these new opportunities because they're going to be the game changer and they will make other ones obsolete. We've seen so many examples in the past several centuries. Since industrialization, it has speeded up. This is going to continue in a much faster pace, no question.
Yeah. So when you were at Parsons, you really had a lot of opportunity to work with young people, and as I'm listening to you, you mentor me every time I talk to you, whether you know it or not. And I think what a great mentor you were to so many of the students there. Do you still get to have that opportunity to work with young people in any capacity? And what is your sort of perspective on what you're seeing coming from, those the generation behind or two generations behind us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing it in several different ways. One, obviously, is many of the graduates, while I was at Parsons, I'm still in touch with and continuing to help them guide their journeys. But beyond that, I have spent the past 5 years while I was at Parsons to really focus on sustainable innovation and a lot of engagement across incubators, accelerators around the world. So I am being part of many of the prizes and panels and competitions, which exposes me to new ideas. And I continue to mentor. I'm part of, let's say, the Global Change Awards, all the way to New York Fashion Tech Lab, the University of Cambridge's Sustainable Leadership Platform, to many others. And I know it's quite demanding to be able to give time to so many spaces, but at the same time, it's a way we continue to engage, learn ourselves, but also give direction to things we care about. So that connections matters to me more than anything else. So I am doing that. So having said that, so I have a global reach to many of these solutions. Some of them are Generation Z, but some of them may be a little older, but at least they're looking at new solutions as startups. And what I love is that, especially in these spaces, the focus is not about building the next big brand. I think fashion industry all the way to design schools are now in that moment of recognizing it's not just about creating brands that are producing more collections that are going to be copied by other brands that are leveraging designers' creativity. And one is so saturated. Two, we all have too much product anyway, so we need to look for new business models. And it doesn't have to be just a brand business model, but it's also solutions across the whole value chain, even if it's a very specific one that goes very deep and very narrow. And there's a need for that, everything from a single material to a single application on a textile to how do you create a new processing on a certain product to wastewater treatment facilities. And so it's great to see people from engineering technology background getting into these spaces, recognizing that fashion industry is very large, has an impact, and they're starting to engage. And I love those conversations where sometimes you're talking to people that have nothing to do with the creative sector, but they're interested in serving the creative sector with sustainable solutions, or the other way around. And there's always that language barrier which you need to cross in terms of creative language versus technical language. But I think this is the value of a community. So it's more about connecting and coming together, learning from each other. And so that's why I'm so excited about what the future may entail based on all these new solutions that are about addressing different parts of the value chain itself.
Absolutely. Well, it is a tremendous time for creativity, right? Anytime there's limitations, and we have and you know this from a design perspective, anytime you put limitations in the criteria for what your output is going to be, you start to think of ingenious and innovative new ways to approach that, or new materials or new solutions. And one of the things like we're thinking a lot about is how do you eliminate the use of coal and fabric production, and what can we even scale waterless dyeing systems or other new technologies or ways to dye fabrics, and that doesn't take tremendous amount of water, thermal heat, et cetera. and these are challenges that the industry is putting out there right now. And it's almost, I think it's kind of an exciting time, almost like X prizes that can be popping up around these issues. So with that, like, what are you seeing or most excited about? What challenges or what tech or solutions are you getting kind of jazzed about?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of excitement around carbon capture, and people are applying it in many different ways, right? So carbon capture into ink, carbon capture into new polyester, carbon capture into other solutions that may address the industry's needs, and through different mechanisms. So you can capture directly from, let's say, the oil industry, all the way to other industries that are polluting and using new technologies to build manufacturing spaces to be able to convert into solutions. But beyond that, obviously, there's huge appetite around the waste that is already out there, and what do we do with it? So recycling systems are evolving very quickly, and both on the design and the manufacturing side, there's a lot of innovation. What I was amazed, even last year's selection of LVMH Prize, there were so many designers that were already looking at secondhand garments as the first way to use textiles, because they all know that there's already too much out there. We don't need to invest in new fabrics. So that's a great start from the creatives to lead. But obviously, the minute they scale, they hit that barrier where they don't know how much dead stock they have access to. How are they going to grow their business? So the other side has to come into play to say that recycle can be in many different forms. It doesn't have to be just polyester. It can be also in many different qualities, and it can be available locally. So I think what we're seeing is innovation is happening in all these spaces. One is scaling it up. It's the moment now we're seeing a lot of experimentation around scaling up, which will happen in the next 3 to 5 years. Some of them will succeed. And the other is localization and mass customization. So there is a hope for solutions where they are scaled, they are locally available, they are mass manufactured, and on the consumer end, if you're able to actually promote the idea of basically made to order, so that you're not actually buying anything you don't need that doesn't fit you. I mean, also there's a lot of play happening with technology, and so many people I talked about scanning, all the way from your foot scan to be able to get the right shoe, to body scans that looks at perfect fits, to even avatars with your garments so that you're creating your digital identity, to now, which is what I'm so curious where we're going to end up, is that a young generation is very much in the digital sphere as much as in the physical. So which means that our digital identity actually matters more. So we already have designers and brands that are only creating digital products. So this is suddenly changing consumer perception, mindset, purchasing power is shifting into different places. 9-year-olds are buying digital clothes to be able to use for their gaming, right? So we need to analyze the psychology of this and what's the impact of that. Do they buy less or more physically? What is the mean for sustainability? But the landscape is changing. So when we say technology, some of it is about really the garments, how we make it, do we localize it, do we manage the carbon impact? The other is consumer behaviors. How do we reduce the amount that we are using? How do we use recycled materials? But sometimes, how do we just focus on the digital aspect to satisfy our needs so that we don't have to buy as much?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I get really excited. You're mentioning sort of this direct to consumer approach. I mean, anyone can, with social media and influence, can get a brand out there and start to create a pipeline in this just in time or just on demand production, which we studied in business school years and years ago for other industries like automotive.
Exactly.
You know, there's a reason why you wait for your car when you have it custom. You know, they're actually making it for you. And so as we start to look at that, I think the psychology, I'm curious, will the psychology of our relationship to it, if it was personalized, made for me, my measurements, you know, I picked the patterns, will all of this start to make us care more and treat it less as a commodity and more as something that, you know, have a deeper relationship to, therefore I'm not going to discard it as rapidly. I just wonder if that's a hypothesis that will hold true.
I mean, the reality is fashion is identity. So the question is, how are you creating your identity? The more channels we offer to end user, to all of us, the easier it will be to encourage people to change behaviors. Today, we are used to doing it through buying new products. but already rental is a good option, right? We've seen already so many people adopt the idea of rental or secondhand products, because it's about the identity. They want to show what they want to see at a certain occasion. That doesn't mean that you own it for life. The minute you're getting into the digital sphere, that brings it to another place. And then, of course, we haven't touched on, but one of the biggest evolutions that's going to happen is around the wearables, and not wearables in the clunky way we're thinking about, but I truly believe everything we use technologically will be integrated into soft materials, which means that you have a different relationship. So suddenly, if your garment is your phone, because you don't have a hardware in the way we know it, you value it in a different way, right? If your glasses are the screen that you're seeing content, probably you will care about it in a very different way. So as this happens, fashion will become still relevant, but in a different way. And maybe it's just about changing the facade of it, and maybe it's just virtual changes. Because if we are integrating digital aspects into our whole body, then maybe we don't need to change as many clothes. Maybe we need special textiles, one that helps us to be in the right temperature, right condition all the time. But also to somebody else, it represents the outfit we want, because everybody is using the same, let's say, technology on their faces. So you're just changing their outfit digitally rather than physically. I mean, maybe that sounds utopic, but it's a version that's perfectly feasible.
Yeah. So you mean I can, like, my Fitbit will now be my underwear or something, or my socks or something?
Whenever you want to integrate it, I will let you choose that.
I love it.
Maybe socks.
Maybe socks. Cool. Well, okay, this is so great. I could talk to you for an hour. Obviously, you've done that in person. I think one of my last trips to New York, you and I got together and had dinner, or met in the cafe, and just talked about all these great things. So I'm glad we're bringing this forward. A couple last questions, just to bring it home. I think I know the answer to this one, but are you optimistic about the fashion industry and where it goes, and it remains vibrant and productive, and also evolves with the needs of the world?
Look, I mean, especially if you're a key player in the fashion industry, you're responsible for building an optimistic future. So as an industry veteran, I have to be optimistic, and I have to push for things that is in the right direction. Not everybody sees the industry same way, but I will be always optimistic, and I will only push for solutions that are in the right direction. And that's why I care about building that community, having our friends. So Lewis and friends, everybody in your podcast, we should all be after the same agenda. The more of us pushing it, we are the tipping point. We're going to make that change happen, right? We put our effort in the direction everything needs to go, and it will happen, even if it's not tomorrow, in a decade, in 2 decades. And that's, in the grand scheme of things, it's perfectly acceptable.
I love that. All right. So what's inspiring you today? Are you reading any great books or listening to podcasts or anything that's kind of giving you your own inspiration?
I'm following a lot of different areas and reading a lot of different things, but I think it's more about the people. So I have been shifting my focus now to Middle East because of the new role that I've taken on. And I think what's inspiring me is the new talent and the raw excitement and interest about building something new with a real commitment on sustainability and innovation. It's something that even pleasantly surprised me. So I can't wait to see having a new region really push the agenda and having a global voice around it. So it's not necessarily a book, but it's about the people themselves. And let's give credit to not only the people we know that are always pushing the agenda, but the rest of the world we haven't engaged with. So I encourage everybody to look at what different places in the world are doing that are not always getting the attention, from Latin America to Africa to Middle East to parts of Asia, because now we're globally connected. Everybody's following, they're hungry and they're interested and they have solutions. So let's enable that, and let's connect everybody into that global infrastructure and the ecosystem, so that we are one voice and we are moving in the same direction. Hence, I'm really keen to also work on these solutions all together, wherever I am and whatever I'm doing. So
I love it. Well, I want to be a part of the future that you're building. So thank you for being, absolutely. And so thank you for being a friend and a real driver in the fashion industry around all the work that's happening around sustainability and better production and ethical sourcing and and innovation. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me to join and having a fun conversation with you.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it again a couple months or a year down the road when we've got
yes,
some more
I would love
things
to. I would love
about.
to see where we are.
That sounds great. All right, thanks, Burak. Have a good day.
Absolutely. Nice seeing you. Bye-bye.
You too.